Hello, and welcome to the new episode of Dakota Boys Talk Movies. Tonight we are going to be doing a movie review of a new movie. We'll be talking about Deepwater Horizon. Not exactly the movie we were planning on going to see, but hey, we got to see it. And we got a free movie ticket out of the deal, so...
Yeah, we killed two birds and only had to pay for one of the birds. I don't think that's how that goes, but
something like that.
I went with it anyway. That's how this night's going.
Yeah,
we just go with it.
We were gonna review a different movie, and then they had some technical difficulties and gave us all free movie passes and said,
I think it was the update, the Apple update ruined everything.
They forgot to pay their Netflix subscription.
Yes, apparently the movie theater just downloads movies now.
Yeah, they were like, we couldn't get it to download. Like, oh, that's just sad. That's just sad. I miss film days.
Which really begged the question: was it entirely legal?
Yeah,
it made me wonder.
Wait, were you getting that's why there's been Asian subtitles at every movie I've gone to, and like a person walking across the screen. Wait, they show that piracy thing at our theater. Oh man. So anyway, we may do that other movie in the future, so we don't need to worry about bringing it up, what it was. But, yeah, so we ended up sneaking. No, we didn't sneak in. She told us we could just go to any other movie we wanted to. And we're like, eeny, meeny, miny, you. Actually, it was the one that was just kind of starting, so we went to it. But it was one we were both kind of interested in, and so we checked it out. This was... Apparently, it's the second in... kind of an unofficial trilogy that Mark Wahlberg and director Peter Berg are kind of doing here, where they're going to have another one coming out, man, sooner than later in 2017 even already.
Yeah.
A movie about the Boston Marathon bombing. And they did Lone Survivor previously. And now, of course, here in the middle here is their BP. Well, I guess the oil rig wasn't owned by BP, but BP had hired these guys to start this well for them in the Gulf of Mexico. And yeah, so it's kind of the story of basically everything that went from kind of bad to this doesn't look good to awful to absolute hellish nightmare is basically the events of this movie. It just seemed like it was kind of one of those like nothing was going right from the get-go, and everything just went into nightmare mode.
Yeah, there was...
And it was a lot of, I don't know, Dakota, what did you know about this incident, I guess, before going into this movie?
Well, I think like most people, it seemed like people were... It was a horrible disaster, but it seems like more people were focused on the aftermath of the explosion.
Well, see, that's where I was too, because what I remember about this oil spill was nothing about what this movie was about, and more about the fact that CNN and whatever, MSNBC and all those 24-hour news networks had this little video in the corner of the oil billowing out for the next 87 days or whatever, that there was just gallons and gallons and gallons of oil entering the ocean and how it was affecting wildlife. And granted, this was the most significant worst natural disaster or whatever you want to call it in U.S. history, but
ecological nightmare, I guess.
But that's what I thought was kind of cool about this movie, is that it stuck to let's just stick with what we know. Let's not get into the politics of it, but let's just tell the story of what happened on the rig. And they still were able to, there's the scene where they show some sort of pelican covered in oil kind of fall and roll into a boat, and suffocating to death covered in oil. And so you get into the fact that there was a significant oil thing in this movie, but what this movie was portraying as more important in, as going on in this movie is the human lives that were involved in this undertaking and the things that kind of led them to that moment of when everything went to crap.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I I was not even aware of the fact that people had died. All I know is there was a fire in an oil rig. Next thing you know, there's all this oil being pumped into the Gulf. And I think maybe one of the reasons he made this movie was kind of just because there was a great story about people just trying to survive
Yeah,
behind it. And
as far as Peter Berg movies, in my opinion, this was probably, out of the ones I've seen, his most competent film. That doesn't necessarily mean it's maybe like the greatest one. I don't know. Out of the ones I've seen, of ones he's made that I've seen, I would call this one probably the most well executed overall. And I think just like setup coming into the story, because he actually did a little bit of like getting to know at least our main character and who he was, and a little bit of the stakes there before we get into the situation that really takes up the movie. But I don't know. What do you like? What did Peter Berg as a director? Where are you at with him?
I think he's okay. I was a huge fan of Lone Survivor. I was never. Oh, good Lord! I'm drawing a blank
Hancock.
here. Hancock. I kind of. Oh man, didn't like it at all.
Battleship.
Battleship. I just hated it. I'm trying to think of what was it? Not Friday Night Lights.
Yeah, he did Friday Night Lights.
Oh yeah, there were so many football movies that came out around that time that kind of dealt with the same stuff.
Because then he produced the TV show, I believe.
Yeah. This is like one of only a few movies I've actually sat through and enjoyed it. One being Friday Night Lights, this one, and then Lone Survivor. But I don't know. It seems like he's hit and miss.
Yeah.
Lately though, he's more focused on less on special effects, kind of trying to do a blockbuster story, more focused along the lines of telling human stories and just putting them on film.
Yeah, and he's always, it seems like with a lot of his movies, it seems like besides, Hancock and maybe one or two others, like he focuses on things that are true stories or have a relative amount of real life aspect to them. Like Friday Night Lights would have been like one of his more, a little over a decade ago, hits that was a true story. And then he did The Kingdom, which I don't know if you saw that one. It was like a Jamie Foxx, Jennifer Garner kind of Middle East movie, which wasn't a true event story, I don't believe, but kind of had that air of like reality to it. But then, after Hancock, he really got into just kind of more back into this true story. I think it's like he wants to tell. I think that's the thing, is he like wants to tell interesting stories about real life people and the events that they were in. And that's the thing with this movie, is there were a few parts of it where I was like, man, I would like to look into if that's really how some of this played out, because if so, man, there were some pretty significant kind of heroic moments for some of the guys on that rig. And it's like, man, was this him like just building up the movie to be, like more, whatever you want to call it, kind of patriotically heroic, or if this really happened. But what it was is how do you want to put it? The guys who were running this oil rig, who were hired by BP, were a little more like, we got to take our time here and make sure because everything's been going wrong. Let's take our time and make sure we got everything where we need to be before we release this beast. This oil, they have to take it out carefully, or it'll just, it's oil. It's just ready to burst. People all see those images of oil just bursting from the ground. And so they don't feel like things are adequately in place yet to just start pumping. And all the BP side of it is saying is, we're pushing 50 days behind. We need to get pumping because we're just wasting money sitting here not pumping oil. Let's get going. And so there's kind of this butting of heads between the two sides here, and through a series of circumstances and testing if it is ready, we find out that things weren't put into place properly that caused this giant disaster. And this is the part I do kind of remember, is I do remember that BP, along with just other oil companies, this event did cause them to be really called out on, are you really checking all your boxes before you're doing these things? And it just brought into the idea of, should we be tapping into these places in places like the Gulf of Mexico where it can affect so many things if something goes wrong? It just kind of brought all those questions to the surface. So, but like we said, this movie wasn't about this. Movie was about that specific period and those men and women that were involved in this incident. So, as most of you probably know, this starred Mark Wahlberg, Kurt Russell, John Malkovich doing an interesting Cajun accent. Let's see, we had Gina Rodriguez, which got kind of shot to fame because of was it CW show, I believe it is, the Jane the Virgin.
Yeah.
Where she leads it. And so now this is kind of one of the first big movies she's kind of been in here, and she's a lead. And then Mark Wahlberg's wife, played by Kate Hudson. And so known people are in this, but there's also a cast of familiar faces that you kind of maybe recognize, and then a lot of ones that you just kind of don't, just to kind of fill in, making it, I think, a little more real life by having faces that aren't super recognizable. But as far as that goes, how did you feel about this movie, Dakota, and kind of how it played out? And I mean, I know, like I've kind of talked about, I thought it was competently done and looked very well, but what kind of stuck out to you in this?
Well, one thing that I definitely liked about this movie was kind of just how normal everyone seemed. Like this is the crew of this kind of oil rig is kind of like, if Armageddon was done with less, someone writing who wasn't so kind of crazy, this is how it would have turned out. But yeah, that's what kind of really jumped out at me, was just how kind of the characters were. Nobody, even John Malkovich with his accent, didn't really wasn't too jarring. He seemed he was doing a pretty good job of playing kind of this kind of money grubbing company man.
He did that accent, but it didn't really it didn't jar you out of everything else that was going on or anything like sometimes that can go. But you're right, just in the dialogue of the movie, it felt very like they were just workers on a rig. Like, the dialogue was set up, and the way they delivered it was in a way where it's just like the guys are just kind of shooting the breeze with each other, and then when you have I got to go talk to these stupid company men again, you really felt the kind of annoyedness there was between Kurt Russell's character and the company men, and just kind of how they didn't see eye to eye on these things. And so, yeah, it did kind of feel, because even today when I was out getting my mail, there were some guys doing some construction nearby, and I just heard the guy in the machine just swearing up a storm at the supervisor, you don't ever talk to me. It was just screaming, and it just felt like that's how it is. When those guys get into those moments where they're just they're irked by something and they're just set off, and it's just and then you just kind of see the supervisors kind of nod and listen, and then just kind of walk away. And you kind of feel that in this movie too, where it's just they're not yelling that bad, but you just kind of feel that same kind of regular guy type work environment thing. And so, yeah, it did kind of make it feel very, very real. But that's what I'm saying. It was really competently done in all those ways. And as far as, man, once we'll just call it the disaster moment happens and takes off, oh my gosh. The rest of the movie just is one long, intense sequence.
Yeah. I was honestly kind of thinking this was going to turn into the Poseidon Adventure.
Yeah. I
And-
was right there with you because I had that run through my head a couple different times during this, and it probably didn't help that Kurt Russell was in that remake,
Yeah.
Poseidon. But yeah, that kind of ran through my head a few times where it felt like that.
Yeah, I was just expecting melodrama and cheesiness and, you know, some old guy like, damn, I was 2 days from retirement or something like that.
Yes.
Just that sort of
Or the
level.
Gene Hackman guy who just yells out at God before he dies or something. But yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. But yeah, but it didn't get that far. It didn't get
Yeah.
into that melodramatic 70s disaster movie schlock.
Someone says "Mother of God" right before they're, you know, in an explosion.
Yeah, they look out the window and kind of drop the phone from their face as they see something coming. No, but there wasn't that, and I think part of that was that they were trying to be very careful and respectful, I think, of this incident because this incident did take 11 lives.
Yeah.
11 lives were killed in this incident, so I think they wanted to make sure that it didn't come across all schlocky and things like that, but that it's like, no, we want to be respectful of those people's lives that were lost and respectful of these guys who nearly died and probably came out with some traumatic issues that they had to deal with after this. In fact, we get a little bit of that at the end where we see, like, you know, I mean, it's a pretty significant event to go through and see carnage, really, and your life nearly taken or flash before your eyes, whatever you want, fill in the blank with there. And so, yeah, there was that aspect of it to it. But yeah, I guess overall I was just really impressed with, and I was joking with Dakota earlier, I think this is the first movie I've ever seen with Kate Hudson where I wasn't absolutely annoyed by her and was like, all right, kill her! Like, just wanting her to not be in this movie. And part of it was she limited screen time. But also, she just wasn't annoying. So that's just me and my problem with Kate Hudson. But other than that, not a whole lot to say about this movie other than, like, yeah, it's pretty good. Definitely. But my one disclaimer would be, like I said, once it takes off, it's really intense. So if you're someone who enjoys real-life movies that involve, you know, these type of events, that maybe it is a disaster, maybe not, but aren't a real, like, have trouble with intenseness. This one is pretty intense.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't really know what to call it the fireball sequence towards the end of the film. There's nothing you could really say that could compare to it, just because it's so just intense and there's just fire everywhere.
Yeah.
Even Backdraft kind of just pales.
Another Kurt Russell movie.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Just pales in comparison to this movie.
The way it was filmed. Okay, first off, you have you have shooting out of the mud, oily liquid or whatever, and it's just like I don't know. Like, I felt my heart kind of pick up in pace a little bit because you could feel the kind of intensity of that shooting out, you know, and you see the power of it and just how it's like shredding apart the metal things around them and things like that. And then, you know, like we said, everything just goes wrong. It just hits the fan and this rig blows up. It feels like 4 different times just as things keep going wrong. And my goodness, it's like this movie, like the last half, it's like you feel like you're there because all you saw was, it felt like orange fire for the last half of the movie. And you really are in the events, which is what like I said, there's some Peter Berg movies I haven't seen, one being Lone Survivor. I just never saw it. I know Marcus Luttrell's story, so I can imagine what the movie is like. But I heard that about that movie, that you really feel what it was to be in that moment. Would you say that's true with Lone Survivor, Dakota? You really feel like what it was to be in that moment of where they're just kind of trapped in a lot of ways?
Yeah, he definitely, Peter Berg definitely goes for realism in his movies, and it pays off. Probably more so than anyone else, even probably Clint Eastwood.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just he has this way of kind of catching the way he kind of, what I was really noticing in the movies is the way he decided to capture moments, and what he decided to have the focus on and then bring the focus to was just like, oh my goodness, yeah, it just kind of kept that, I don't know, the pace of that just kind of made it feel like you were just in that disaster there, which is good and bad, because then it kind of causes you to go, oh my gosh, yeah, you start thinking about, man, this really happened, but at the same time, it does just kind of cause you to think about the fact that there's people that do these jobs and things like that, and maybe you start thinking about, I start thinking about even how in subtle ways he's causing you to think about, what are these things we're doing, and are we doing these in the most effective ways, and are we having the right checks and balances in the things we're doing, and things like that kind of can come up, because I think most people, I maybe I'm an idealist, but I feel like most people are smart enough that when they see things like this, you don't have to manipulate them. Just tell your story, and if people just process that, they'll start thinking of these things like, oh, what were the events of this, and what could have been different, and should this have been, what could have been changed to make this not happen, or things like that. And so, I think that's the thing. That's the benefit of true stories, is like, I get tired of like these manipulative true stories. Like, just tell the story, and I think a lot of things fall into place from there. You don't have to make up your big things. And if you have to make up things to make it interesting, I think you need to ask yourself, is this worth telling? Is this an important thing to make into a movie or something like that? But I think with that, let's give grades. So, Dakota, where are you at with
letter grades, huh?
where are you at with how you feel about this movie?
It's been a while. You know what? I'm going to give this film probably just a solid B. I'm going to give it a B.
Okay, solid B. I'm gonna have to agree with you on this one. I'm kind of right there too, and I think some of that is like, I think it's just a really solid, well-made movie, but and it didn't change my life or anything. I mean, it made me look at an event that I didn't totally understand this aspect of it, and it was interesting, kind of like when we did 13 Hours. It's kind of interesting to see that perspective of it, really. And I think it's another movie where it's when you just see it from the point of view of the people involved, it should cause you just to kind of think about that and look into these things. And that's kind of what this did. And so that's why I have to give it a nice, good movie grade, like B, where it isn't like an Oscar contender, but it's just a well-done movie. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're at on that. And so, anything else to say on that, Dakota?
Well, this movie gave me a great quote that I can't wait to start using.
Oh, what's that?
Hope is not a tactic. Hope is not a tactic, people.
That's true. Yeah, hope. Yeah, he uses the idea of when he's talking about, when Mark Wahlberg's character brings up the idea of being prepared and having
done these tests,
why the importance of tests and preparing and things like that, and how when you go into these, when you're doing something as dangerous as their job, do you really want to just rely on, well, I hope we crossed all our T's and dotted our I's, or do you really check this out? So, yeah, that was kind of an interesting moment when that came up. But, yeah, I think with that, we both give this a check it out. If you're into true stories and don't mind some intenseness. So, yeah, we hope you check us out on Facebook. We're on there. We put some different movie news things on there and updates about things we're doing, things like that. And hopefully you'll subscribe to us on iTunes or YouTube. And we are still looking into, in the future, doing video podcasts, I guess. Vlodcasts.
I think we could just call them videos, maybe?
We're going to do videos, but we will still have like the audio of those available on iTunes, things like that, for those of you who still just want to listen.
We are aware that there's going to be some people out there who are going to say, you guys You guys have a voice for radio, or face for
we
radio.
have a face for radio. So yeah, I'm kind of excited about venturing down that path and
Well,
and
we've
seeing
been
what
we've
happens
been
there.
we've been just kicking around doing more than reviews too, though. So
Yeah, yep.
who knows? We could revolutionize the Dakota boys.
We're gonna change our name. No, we're gonna try that. But on the other side of that, yeah. So keep a lookout. Hopefully those things are coming sooner than later, and we can start doing things a little more consistent again. So yeah. But thanks for listening to this episode. Glad you tuned in, and keep watching those movies, and we'll keep watching our movies, and we'll come together and talk about it. Although we can't hear you on here, but hopefully we can hear you on Facebook or in the comments on YouTube or wherever. Let us know what you think about things. That'd be great. So yeah, this is Steven.
And this is Dakota.
We'll see you later.